As some of you heard me saying but could not see because I had your screens locked, and as others of you did not hear because I had you locked out, let's move on. We today are going to look at the history of Thanksgiving. As we know, that ties in with our unit on Native Americans and looking at reasons that their culture changed or what was happening inside of their culture. We're going to continue on with that today by looking at a video from Brain Pop Jr. about the history of Thanksgiving. Yesterday, you learned about two groups of people. You learned about Native Americans and you learned about pilgrims, the European settlers that came. Originally, those relationships were very peaceful. And to celebrate those peaceful relationships, we established a holiday called Thanksgiving. Today, as you're learning about Thanksgiving, you are going to be thinking about these things. 3 things that you learned, 2 things that you found interesting from the video, and 1 question that you have. I'll put you into some breakout rooms so that you can think about those together. 3 things that you learned, 2 things that you found interesting, and 1 question that you have, okay? So without further ado, for real this time, now that I don't have you locked out, here's our video on Thanksgiving.
To celebrate Thanksgiving, the class is sharing what we're thankful for. I'm thankful for our family, Becca and Tasha, our dog, and soccer. Thanksgiving is a holiday when family and friends celebrate over a feast or a big meal. It's a time to be thankful and appreciate each other. Good question, Moby. To understand why we celebrate Thanksgiving, you first need to know about the Wampanoag, a group of Native people. Who are the Wampanoag? The Wampanoag are made up of different tribes. For thousands of years, they've lived in the area that is now Massachusetts and Rhode Island. When Europeans arrived in the 1500s, the tribes traded with them. Then, the Europeans forced some Wampanoag men into slavery. One of the men was Tisquantum, who was also known as Squanto. You're right, Moby. It was a tough time for the Wampanoag, and things got even tougher. The European explorers brought a disease that the native people couldn't cure. Many Wampanoag got sick, and over half of the population died. Then, in 1620, a ship called the Mayflower arrived on Wampanoag lands. The people on board were from England, and they had left their homes to settle in America. Why did the settlers leave England? In the early 1600s, a group of people in England disagreed with the church and the government. They wanted to leave the country and start their own colony. A colony is a place where people settle far from home. There was already a colony in America called Jamestown, in what is now Virginia, so they headed that way. They sailed on the Mayflower and landed in a place they called Plymouth. It's in the area that is now Massachusetts. Today we call these settlers pilgrims. Well, they didn't really dress that way, Moby. Over time, people created and shared artwork of the pilgrims that wasn't really accurate or true. What happened when the pilgrims landed in Plymouth? The settlers arrived in winter, and many had gotten sick on the voyage. They were cold, tired, and unprepared for the weather. They didn't have enough food, so they stole from a Wampanoag storage pit. I know, Moby, it wasn't right. Massasoit Usamiquin was the sachem of the Wampanoag. A sachem is a leader. The word Massasoit means great sachem or great leader. Massasoit Usamiquin met with John Carver the governor of Plymouth Colony. They agreed to keep peace and protect and help each other. Squanto, the Wampanoag who was forced into slavery, had made his way back home. He spoke English and taught the Pilgrims how to grow crops. He also showed them around the area. One day, the Wampanoag heard loud noises coming from the Plymouth Colony. Massasoit Usamiquan and a large group of men went to see if the settlers needed help. Turns out, they were having a feast to celebrate the harvest. The Wampanoag and the settlers decided to join together, but there wasn't enough food. So the Wampanoag hunted and brought more food so there'd be enough for everyone. The feast lasted 3 days. They ate seafood, squash, berries, nuts, and venison, which is deer meat. There was peace between the Wampanoag and the settlers for a while. Then, more settlers moved onto Wampanoag land and created laws that were not fair to the native people. Eventually, war broke out. In the end, the settlers won and forced the Wampanoag to leave their homes. The native people had to dress, pray, and live like the settlers. Over time, people began a tradition of sharing a big meal in the fall, similar to the one had by the Wampanoag and Pilgrims. In 1863, President Abraham Lincoln made Thanksgiving an official holiday. He hoped it would bring people together in peace during the Civil War. Now we celebrate Thanksgiving on the 4th Thursday of November. How do we celebrate Thanksgiving today? Every family has their own Thanksgiving traditions and foods. A lot of families eat turkey and stuffing, mashed potatoes, green beans, and pumpkin pie. But each family is different. Americans come from all over the world, and many families share food from their cultures to celebrate Thanksgiving. Rosie's family is from Guatemala, and they always eat tamales on Thanksgiving. Priscilla is from the Philippines, and their feast includes lumpia, a roll filled with meat and vegetables. No matter what people eat, Thanksgiving is about spending time together. It's also a time to remember our past. Today, the Wampanoag and Native people across the country gather on Thanksgiving to remember their ancestors and the challenges they faced. It's just as important to understand our history as it is to appreciate all the important things in our lives. What are you thankful for, Moby? Spoons, cabbages, boogers, and Tim? Tim? But what about me? Or Grandpop, or Mia?
Hey, Moby, ready to go out and play? Oh, hi, Annie.
That is Tim from our standard brain pop. Alrighty, today you are getting ready to go into some breakout rooms. And inside of those breakout rooms, you are going to discuss these things. 3 things that you learned. So if you feel like you only remember one thing you learned, you're going to be in a breakout room with each other so you can share those items. 2 things that you found interesting, and 1 question that you still have, 1 thing that you are wondering about what we just looked at together. So let me set up these breakout rooms for you. Here we go. And put these over here. Beautiful. Okay. Here come your breakout room invites for you to discuss 3 things you learned, 2 things you found interesting, and 1 question that you still have. All Alrighty, so in your breakout rooms today, you should have been working on the assignment called The History of Thanksgiving. The History of Thanksgiving. It asks you to watch the Brain Pop Junior video on Thanksgiving, which we did, and then to record your thinking on the next page about what you learned, what you found interesting, and a question that you still have. The last page is an optional activity that I'd like for you to try to get done sometime, maybe over break, to spend some quality time with your family. But it asks you to interview a family member. We've heard what Thanksgiving was like for the original celebrators of it. We've heard what Thanksgiving is like for different cultures around the world. And now you're going to get the opportunity to learn about what Thanksgiving is like for one of your family members. So this part is an optional activity, but I'd really like to encourage you to do it. There's some interview questions here for you to ask the person that you choose to interview about Thanksgiving. And there's an opportunity here for you to take a picture and upload it. This is a really great way to get to know your maybe older family members a little bit better and to show them respect for their time and some interest in their lives. So consider completing this interview on a family member about Thanksgiving. Okay. All right.